Part 1. A New Theory of Performance Management. Chapter 1. The Pinnacles of Human Achievement and Why We Form Organizations. On July 20th, 1969, masses crowded into Times Square, Central Park, Trafalgar Square, the city centers of the Soviet Union, North and South Vietnam, Hong Kong, and other places around the world. They gathered to watch Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin start their descent to the lunar surface. All told, 650 million people shared that experience, watching and listening in theaters, taverns, airport and train terminals, and at home, in wonder and awe, as Armstrong stepped onto the moon and declared, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Armstrong's small step and mankind's giant leap were the culmination of 300,000 people's efforts, employed by 20,000 industrial firms and universities, integrated into collective action for that common purpose. In fact, just broadcasting Armstrong and Aldrin's landing and excursion required more than 100 people, mostly young people in their early 20s, who staffed tracking stations in Australia, receiving and processing the multiple signals being transmitted from 250,000 miles away, so those hundreds of millions could see and hear them wherever they were. All that was accomplished less than 9 years after President John F. Kennedy addressed a congressional joint session in May 1961 and put forth the challenge, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. This magic of collective human endeavor isn't just for the extraordinary. It can also be found in the seemingly mundane. Consider that right now, across the world, there are millions of people preparing their medication for the day. They are each shaking out a pill from a bottle and taking it with a glass of water. One of those millions might be taking medication to help relieve symptoms of her cardiac disease, helping her live a more fulfilling, healthier life, just as all the other medications being shaken out of all those other pill bottles right now will help all the other people live more fulfilling, healthier lives. Those common medications, which convert diseases that were once horrific and terminal into conditions that can be managed, if not cured, aren't simple or easy to create. They are made possible by thousands of person-years of work, spread across a decade, and performed by myriad specialists, chemists, biologists, pharmacologists, computational biologists, medicinal chemists, logisticians, clinical trial managers, doctors, nurses, computational chemists, data scientists, software engineers, and production experts. All their contributions are integrated and harmonized into the invention, production, and provision of that pill. All that distributed genius, thousands of people working toward a common goal, inventing in parallel, with individual teams each working on their challenging problems and knowing that their efforts are important and fit into a larger goal, all that came together, be it in that small step on the moon or in that medication shaken out of a bottle. Both are pinnacle accomplishments that organizations achieved and that no single individual could have imagined doing alone. Many of us have been lucky enough to work on projects like these once in our career, and it was likely the most rewarding experience of our life, not because the job was easy, but because the job was challenging and involved solving problems and conquering challenges much larger than ourselves. For example, I, Steve, once mentioned to my Uncle Larry that I'd seen an SR-71 Blackbird spy plane on the deck of the Intrepid Aircraft Carrier Museum. "That was the greatest program I was ever part of," he said. His comment surprised me. He and my Aunt Diane had moved to California to work on that project when they were very young. He was a newly minted electrical engineer, and it was hard to imagine he had that much responsibility within such an enormous undertaking. But I'd missed the point. It wasn't his part that was great. It was the larger whole that gave the experience such meaning. The sad and dismal reality is that too often daily work has little of this magic, regardless of the job, the industry, the importance of the mission, or even a person's seniority. In these situations, people are frustrated because they don't have what they need to succeed. For example, information, approvals, requirements, time. In the absence of overwhelming clarity of purpose, people become exhausted from the heroics and politicking required to get even the smallest things done, and they are too often put in hazardous situations because obvious problems have not been resolved. Over time, it's easy to understand how people in these situations become jaded, cynical, and bored, sometimes feeling that any effort is futile and that their dignity has been eroded away. Whatever potential someone thought they could bring to the job has been diminished, and they know they are unable to contribute to the larger goal. But this is not a book about how leaders can make people feel inspired to work in these dismal conditions. Instead, this is a book that presents a theory of performance, about how leaders can create the conditions so that people can do their work easily and well. By doing so, the part of the enterprise they are responsible for can succeed spectacularly. This is the product of our 30 years each of studying organizations across almost every industry vertical and across nearly every domain of work. The industries we have been able to study include airlines, automotive, banking, biotechnology, consulting, defense, enterprise software, entertainment and media, gaming, government agencies, healthcare, heavy industry, high-tech, industrial production, insurance, manufacturing, military and intelligence agencies, oil and mineral exploration, pharma, retail, semiconductors, social services, software, sportswear, telecommunications, and universities. Domains of work studied include research and development, new product design, software development, factory design and construction, fabrication and production, and delivery and after-sales service. This combined work includes surveying over 36,000 organizations to correlate practices with performance and gathering case studies from over 500 organizations. We have also directly worked with or closely studied nearly 100 organizations across nearly every industry vertical and in nearly every phase of value creation. Additionally, we have worked with leaders at nearly every level to help them solve their organizational goals. Our research and combined experience have uncovered 3 surprisingly simple mechanisms that enable the magic that is found in the extraordinary and exemplary endeavors of the large number of organizations we have studied. With these 3 mechanisms, leaders can wire their organization for success instead of mediocrity. We assert that greatness is created through 3 mechanisms, which create the difference between success and failure. Slowification, to make solving problems easier to do. Simplification, to make the problems themselves easier to solve. And amplification, to make it obvious that there are problems that demand attention and whether they've been seen and solved. Our theory of performance explains many of the things we've seen in our respective and disparate journeys across industries and time. Many management concepts and methodologies already offer a glimpse into how greatness is achieved. You may be familiar with Agile, DevOps, Dr. W. Edwards Deming, the Toyota Production System, OODA, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, Loops, Improvement Katas, and Lean Startup. Or you may have heard of system dynamics, learning organizations, double loop learning, cognitive load, psychological safety, Westrom's organizational typology model, empowerment and participative management, enabling frontline workers, and normalization of deviance. And you may be using tools such as Gemba walks, team topologies, software architecture, Conway's Law, modularity, resilience engineering, and paying down technical debt. All of these are tools for wiring the organization, the social circuitry of processes, procedures, policies, and routines by which individuals' efforts come together into a greater whole. Figure 1.1 in the PDF that accompanies this audiobook shows how these different practices are examples of the three mechanisms of slowification, simplification, and amplification. But none of the aforementioned methods or tools alone can wire your organization for success. TPS and DevOps are arguably two of the most important changes in the management of organizations in the last 50 years, and they come the closest to wiring a winning organization. Before we dive deeper, let's take a brief step back and look at organizations broadly to better understand how these three mechanisms can help you wire a winning organization. Why we join and form organizations. We create organizations for a variety of reasons, but certainly one of them is to accomplish seemingly common but actually audacious undertakings that one person cannot do alone. The goal may be as ambitious as sending a man to the moon, or as common as providing a commercial product or service, such as running a restaurant, bakery, or hospital. Or the goal could be to help society by ensuring national security, educating children and adults, or providing places of worship or shelter for those in need. Almost every organization has a mission or goal, and in all but the smallest organizations, these missions and goals require undertaking activities that are so vast, complex, difficult, specialized, or intricate that they are beyond the ability of any individual to fully comprehend, let alone execute, regardless of how smart, organized, strong, or dedicated they are. What's exhilarating for some, those who pull it off, and frustrating for others, those who do not, are the enormous differences otherwise similar organizations have in fulfilling their aspirations. The paradox of unlevel performance on a level playing field. It's been proposed that organizations gain competitive advantages largely by seizing opportunities that are unavailable to others. This concept, led by Dr. Michael Porter's 5 Forces from his book Competitive Strategy, asserts that organizations enjoy unfair returns by having made the playing field unlevel, by locking in customers, so they cannot consider alternative vendors, preventing suppliers from finding other outlets for their wares, or barring rivals from offering competitive products and services. It would follow from such thinking that when the competitive environment is otherwise fair and free, enterprises would likely be unable to sustain advantage by large margins for long durations. After all, rivals compete for attention from the same customers, source the same capital equipment, IT systems, and raw materials from the same suppliers, are subject to the same rules, regulations, taxation systems, and so forth. Yet such predictions are refuted by reality. Even in sectors where the levelness of the playing field makes for free, even brutal, competition, some organizations create and sustain enormous advantages, regardless of how they are measured: quality, affordability, availability, resilience, reliability, safety, security, responsiveness, speed, or agility. The best organizations generate more value in less time, at lower cost, and seemingly with less effort. They are simply wired to win. Obvious in outcomes. Consistent and durable winners dominate their industry, sometimes for decades, by large margins and across many metrics and dimensions, whereas mediocre organizations are unable to. Imagine 2 sports teams with nearly identical players. The only thing different is the coach. Yet one team consistently beats the other team. When they switch coaches, the other team consistently wins. Here we can conclude that the decisive factor of performance is who is coaching the team. Indeed, this is what happened in numerous case studies we present in the book, such as at NUMMI. The winners are better by a lot and for a long time. Prolonged mediocrity will inevitably lead to failure and losing. Let's explore what this means, whether it's through cross-sectional or longitudinal comparisons. Toyota has led in design and production in the auto industry for some 50 years. Despite being woefully uncompetitive in the late 1950s, it gained advantages through superior quality and productivity, and hence affordability. It built on those leads by cutting in half the time required for major model upgrades, by cutting from weeks to minutes the time to convert plants from one model year to the next, and by being incredibly fast to introduce whole new products and invent whole new technologies. Learn more in the exemplar case study in Chapter 10. In 2007, Apple released the groundbreaking iPhone, with only dozens of software developers creating its applications and user interface libraries. The resulting product redefined what consumers expect from mobile devices. As a result, they were able to dethrone Nokia's dominance in the smartphone market and beat them and the rest of the industry in terms of profitability, market share, etc. Learn more in the Apple-Nokia case study in Chapter 8. Similarly, longitudinal comparisons show how organizations were able to massively improve their performance when leaders changed the organizational wiring. Toyota rewired an organization with its joint venture with General Motors in Fremont, California. New United Motor Manufacturing, Inc., or NUMMI. Within 2 years, what had been one of the worst facilities in the country became one of the best. This was achieved by changing the management system in the facility. The result was that the same people who'd been so unproductive when working for General Motors achieved world-class outcomes when working with Toyota leadership. In manufacturing microprocessors, the differences between the leaders and the rest are huge in terms of throughput times, quality, yield, and sustained product variety within a single plant, etc. What's encouraging is that such performance is replicable. One plant cut its throughput times by 2/3, increased yield, reduced scrap, and otherwise made it far easier for engineers and technicians to use the sophisticated capital equipment they had. The benefits were enormous, $10 million per month in additional profitability. In 2002, Amazon struggled to upgrade its e-commerce software. Able to make only 20 software changes, deployments, per year because of the high risk of outages and the difficulty of coordinating across hundreds or even thousands of software engineers. In 2014, however, Amazon was making some 136,000 deployments every day, quickly and safely. This didn't just make their online retailing more competitive, it became the basis for the cloud computing market. By 2020, this generated $80 billion in revenue for Amazon, 75% of its overall profits. Learn more in the Amazon case study in Chapter 8. The U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, was struggling to dismantle al-Qaeda in Iraq, despite a huge advantage in numbers, equipment, and training. A team of teams rewiring allowed JSOC to reduce its response times, increase its operational tempo, and dismantle the terrorist network. Learn more in the Team of Teams case study in Chapter 8. Organizations such as Allegheny General Hospital, AGH, and Western Pennsylvania Hospital have improved safety, access, and affordability, better care for more people at less cost, while reducing overburden on staff. For instance, AGH completely eliminated deaths due to CLABSI infections, central line-associated bloodstream infections, from 19 in 2003 to 0 in 2006, which was replicated by University of Pittsburgh Medical Center Monongahela. These are just a fraction of the examples that show how some organizations are better at accomplishing great things across sectors: planes, trains, automobiles, tech, high-tech, biotech, education, medical care and health services, heavy industry, national defense, public sector services, and so on. Obvious inexperience. Differences between exceptional and ordinary performance aren't just obvious in aggregated, lagging measures of performance. They're obvious by observing the experiences of people doing their work. When people have difficulty doing their work easily and well, despite investing their best time and energy to support the larger effort, we shouldn't expect the enterprise as a whole to perform well either. This is an organization that has not been wired to win. Conversely, if the organizational wiring regularly sets people up for success, it shouldn't be surprising that the enterprise as a whole succeeds outstandingly. You find this connection between individuals and the organization in the list of organizations in the previous section. Consider the transformation of an emergency department. It started as a place where it was difficult to be a clinician and frustrating to be a patient. After leaders rewired the organization, the emergency department became a very different place, one where clinicians could do their work easily and well, and where patients appreciated the fantastic care they received. Plus, care was available to more patients because of all the liberated capacity of people and place. Initially, patients and their family members were crowded in a waiting area, many anxious to get a clinician's attention. That's probably familiar to those who've needed emergency care. Patients started with registration and triage, but found themselves waiting after each step in the experience, in exam rooms, on chairs, or on gurneys in hallways. Their frustration didn't end there, even after waiting an hour or more for clinicians' attention. Nurses were often distracted from providing care because they had to track down missing information, equipment, or supplies that weren't readily available. Doctors were invariably tethered to computer monitors, trying to navigate medical systems instead of examining and treating people in need. One young resident was seen to throw her hands up in frustration and mutter, "I didn't go to medical school to do this." Now consider the same emergency department after it rewired its social circuitry to better integrate everyone's individual effort toward a common goal. The waiting area was nearly empty, despite patients constantly arriving for care. This was because they changed the registration process. Instead of all the extended waits, patients signed in, were registered almost immediately, and triaged. Within 18 minutes, they were being examined by a doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant. Getting patients through sign-in to examination more quickly had tremendous impact. Nearly 3/4 of the patients could be discharged with a prescription or referral right away. Another 10% to 15% were in serious enough condition to be admitted directly to the hospital. Only a few patients had to be held in the emergency department for observation, pending more advanced imaging and monitoring. The emergency department became a better place for both patient and caregiver. The new social circuitry enabled moving patients gracefully, capably, and respectfully through the department. This meant space was no longer occupied by the many patients stuck somewhere mid-process. The space was repurposed for better uses. Imaging equipment was brought in to save time on having to transport patients to the imaging department. Space was set aside for residents to study collaboratively, to become more skillful in their specialties, and to otherwise have a quiet space for an interlude between often urgent and demanding cases. What caused the transformation? The department leaders, the medical director, the head doctor, and the unit manager, the head nurse, changed how problems of processes, procedures, norms, and routines were addressed. Rather than having their colleagues struggle with the same obstructions, inconveniences, and obstacles that plagued them every day, the leaders amplified problems and devoted time to solving them, creating solutions that could be systematized. For instance, registration had required reconciling names, IDs, SSNs, and medical record numbers. Staff figured out how to get patients into the system faster and more reliably, even with limited information. Exam rooms had been stocked and equipped somewhat haphazardly. Staff methodically identified exactly what was needed, where and when, and created a reliable restocking system. The result was that everything was on hand. Similarly, they methodically figured out how to get the right information where and when it was needed and in the right format. Doctors and nurses no longer wasted their time, energy, and creativity searching and foraging for items. Instead, they could examine, diagnose, and treat patients. By rewiring the organization, leaders helped clinicians and administrators do great work for patients. They spared themselves from always firefighting and expediting for people and resources. Instead, they could lend their own expertise to solve difficult medical problems. What they experienced is what we observe in all organizations that are wired to win. It's easier to work. Collaboration seems choreographed, performance is graceful, and beneficiaries are grateful. Hopefully, you've had reason to be the source and the subject of such feelings. The 3 layers where we create value. All organizations are socio-technical systems, people working with other people, engaging sometimes complex technology to accomplish what they are collaborating on. This was certainly true for the clinicians mentioned in the example above, the professionals working at Toyota to develop, design, produce, and deliver vehicles, the software developers at Apple, and the engineers and technicians in the microprocessor plants. Regardless of domain, collaborative problem-solving occurs on 3 distinct layers. See Figure 1.2 in the PDF accompanying this audiobook, where people focus their attention and express their experience, training, and creativity. Layer 1 contains the technical objects being worked on. These are the technical, scientific, and engineered objects that people are trying to study, create, or manipulate. These may be molecules in drug development, code in software development, physical parts in manufacturing, or patient injuries or illnesses in medical care. For people in Layer 1, their expertise is around these technical objects, that is, their structure and behavior, and their work is expressed through designing, analyzing, fabricating, fixing, repairing, transforming, creating, and so forth. Layer 2 contains the tools and instrumentation. These are the scientific, technical, or engineered tools and instrumentation through which people work on Layer 1 objects. These may be the devices that synthesize medicinal compounds in drug development, the development tools and operational platforms in software development, technologies that transform materials in manufacturing, or the technologies to diagnose and treat patients' illnesses and injuries. Layer 2 capabilities include the operation, maintenance, and improvement of these tools and instruments. These first 2 layers are the technical part of a socio-technical system. Layer 3 contains the social circuitry. This is the overlay of processes, procedures, norms, and routines, the means by which individual efforts are expressed and integrated through collaboration toward a common purpose. This is the socio part of a socio-technical system. When leaders wire their Layer 3 social circuitry, well, the people for whom they are responsible have what they need, when they need it, and in the format they need it. Again, this explains why we very deliberately chose the term social circuitry. Circuits exist to move a resource. For example, electrical energy, pneumatic or hydraulic pressure, data, from where it is to where it is needed. Similarly, organizational circuits are the connections by which ideas, information, services, resources, and support can flow from where they are to where they are needed so that effective collaboration, problem-solving, and value creation can occur. Problems have been redefined so that they are easier, safer, and faster to solve. As a result, people can invest their full creative energies and focus on solving their problems, either in Layer 1, the work object, or Layer 2, the tools or instruments to do their work. Their collective efforts flow together as a team, gracefully as if precisely choreographed. In contrast, consider when the wiring in Layer 3 is inadequate. People doing work are unable to do that work easily or well. They must spend their energy, effort, and cognitive capacity to get what they need, coping and compensating for Layer 3 problems. They are unable to generate and deliver value that others will appreciate. This is because Layer 3 was either overlooked or misaligned with the needs of people working in Layers 1 and 2. Danger zones and winning zones for solving really difficult problems. Leaders manage the social circuitry, Layer 3, that determines whether their organizations get dismal or great outcomes. How this circuitry is designed and operated dictates the conditions in which people can solve difficult problems, continually generate great and new ideas, and put them into impactful practice. Certain conditions make it more difficult to solve problems or generate new and useful ideas. We call that the danger zone. Other conditions make getting good answers easier. We call that the winning zone. The danger zone and winning zone differ across 5 dimensions: nature of problems, hazards and risks, speed of the environment in which we're trying to solve problems, opportunities to learn by experience or experimentation, and finally, clarity about where to focus our problem-solving efforts. For more details, see Table 1.1 in the accompanying PDF. In the danger zone, problems are complex, with many factors affecting the system at once, and their relationships are highly intertwined. Hazards are many and severe, risks of failure are high, and costs of failure can be catastrophic. Systems in the danger zone are difficult to control, and there are limited, if any, opportunities to repeat experiences, so feedback-based learning is difficult, if not outright impossible. In contrast, leaders enable much more advantageous conditions in the winning zone. Problems have been reframed, so they are simpler to address. The hazards and risks have been reduced, so failures are less costly, especially during design, development, testing, and practice. Problem-solving has been shifted into slower-moving situations where the pace of experiences can be better controlled. Opportunities to learn by experience or experimentation are increased to allow more iteration. And finally, there's much more clarity about where and when to focus problem-solving efforts, because it is obvious when problems are occurring, so attention is given to containing and solving them. When we leave ourselves and our colleagues in the danger zone, it becomes extremely difficult to develop and design products and services and to develop and operate systems through which we collaborate and by which we coordinate. In fact, in such conditions, given the complexity and pace of the environment, it's often difficult to even recognize that significant problems are occurring and that they must be addressed to avert disaster. In contrast, when we change our experiences so they happen in the winning zone, generating good answers to difficult problems is much easier because people are better able to put their capabilities to best use. We can move ourselves from the danger zone to the winning zone using the 3 mechanisms of slowification, simplification, and amplification. Let's take a closer look at defining each of these mechanisms. Slowification makes it easier to solve problems by pulling problem-solving out of the fast-paced and often unforgiving realm of performance, that is, operations or execution. Instead, solve problems in the more controllable, forgiving, lower cost, less demanding, and repeatable realms of planning and practice. Examples of slowification practices: using mock-ups, prototypes, simulations, scale model tests, offline problem-solving, land-based models, etc. This shifting of Layer 3 problem-solving into planning and practice allows people to engage in deliberative, reflective, experientially and experimentally informed reasoning, rather than having to constantly react with whatever habits, routines, and legacy approaches have already been ingrained. Simplification makes the problems themselves easier to solve by reshaping them. Large problems are deliberately broken down into smaller, simpler ones through a combination of three techniques: incrementalization, modularization, and linearization. By doing so, we partition complex problems with many interacting factors into many smaller problems. These problems have fewer interacting factors, making them easier to solve. Furthermore, Layer 1, technical object problem solving, can be done in parallel, with less need for Layer 3 coordination, increasing independence of action. Examples of simplification practices: simple workflows, agile software development, modularization, just-in-time, pull systems, etc. Amplification makes it obvious there are problems and makes it clear whether those problems have been seen and solved. Mechanisms are built into Layer 3, social circuitry, to amplify that little things are amiss, drawing attention to them early and often. This focuses attention on containing and resolving small and local glitches before they have a chance to become large and systematically disruptive. Examples of amplification practices: stress tests, and-on chords, smoke detectors, etc., to flag problems sooner rather than later. Ideally, an organization will have the latitude to do all three: slow things down to make problem-solving easier, partition big problems into smaller ones that are simpler to solve, and amplify problems so they're addressed sooner and more often. Even if we cannot do all three, doing two or even one still brings us closer to the winning zone, making it easier for us to take situations about which we know too little and can do too little and convert them into situations in which we know enough and can do enough. Figure 1.3 shows the danger zone in the upper right-hand corner and the winning zone in the lower left-hand corner. Slowification, which makes problem-solving easier to do, moves us from right to left. Simplification, which reformulates problems so they are easier to solve, moves us from the top to the bottom. Note the small signal symbol in the upper right-hand corner, which denotes a lack of amplification, while the larger signal symbol in the lower left-hand corner denotes high amplification. Leadership and the circuitry they create. There has been much written on the difference between leaders and managers. See, for instance, Managers and Leaders, Are They Different? By Dr. Abraham Zalesnik, or How Managers Become Leaders by Dr. Michael D. Watkins. In this book, we use the terms interchangeably and define leaders as those tasked with creating the conditions in which the people whom they manage can achieve the goals or complete the missions for which they are responsible. In all but the smallest endeavors, a leader's primary contribution is not doing the work required to achieve the goal. Instead, they are responsible for everything required to enable that work to be done easily and well. This is achieved through the social circuitry by which people's collaborative efforts are easily coordinated and integrated. Much has also been written on change being driven from the bottom up versus the top down. The first suggests that the change is a grassroots initiative driven by lower to mid-level leaders, while the second suggests that the change is being driven by the highest level leadership. What we have found is that in winning organizations, leaders are deliberate about ensuring that Layer 3 social circuitry is supportive of people's efforts in solving Layer 1 technical object and Layer 2 tools problems. Their role is less supervisory, in the characterized fashion of directive leadership or command and control. For example, I say, you do, compliance without question. Rather, it is more supportive, continuously monitoring the conditions in which people are working, and then adapting and adjusting, so those conditions are most conducive to success. This might remind some of the concepts of servant leadership or frontline empowerment, but this is more than that. It is an emphasis on leaders actively engineering the social circuitry of their organization. So when people for whom they are responsible badge in, buzz in, and otherwise arrive to do work, they walk into situations that are constructed to be the most conducive for success. What to expect in this book, and how to read it. This book is organized into 4 parts. Here in Part 1, we present all the key concepts and terms needed to explain the theory and show their application through 2 vignettes. We designed these vignettes as simple models to introduce fundamental concepts, stripped of real-world complexity. Consider these the equivalent of using pendulums to illustrate Newtonian mechanics in physics, or using supply and demand of widgets to illustrate the basics of economics. Understanding more complex situations doesn't depend on adding new concepts. It depends on using the same ones, but with more sophistication. For instance, the more advanced case might be a pendulum that bounces into a spring, swinging through a viscous fluid. Supply and demand might be for a product with imperfect markets. By the time you finish reading Part 1, you should understand the main ideas of this book. In the next 3 parts, we go into more detail on the 3 mechanisms of slowification, simplification, and amplification. Each part starts with an illustrative case study, showing the mechanism in action to help readers understand the high-level concept. That is followed by an explanation of the theory underpinning the mechanism, with references back to the introductory case study to highlight key points. Next, we present a number of case studies of that mechanism at work, drawn from numerous and varied situations. The quantity and variety of cases is to make a point. The same Layer 3 mechanisms apply, from small scale to large, from an individual artist or small design team up to enormous undertakings, across industry sectors, planes, tech, education, healthcare, and at different phases of value creation, R&D, design, production. These case studies also help generalize the principles so you can better recognize the problems you encounter in your organization and more easily generate useful solutions. Finally, each part concludes with an exemplar case study, which shows the mechanism being used in a consequential and significant situation to create an advantage. You'll likely have heard of these exemplars. Our goal is to interpret what happened through the lens of the 3 mechanisms, so it's clear how using them makes great outcomes possible. Although we wrote the book to be read or listened to from the beginning to the end, there are alternatives. You might want to focus on the theory, the why, before diving into the details, the what and how. If this sounds like you might skip over the case study chapters, 5 and 8. Or you might want to see these mechanisms in pinnacle use. If so, make sure you check out the exemplar case studies in chapters 6, 9, and 10. Or you might love a lot of stories about people accomplishing great things. If this is you, you'll likely love the case study chapters and perhaps the theory chapters. No matter your personal style, if you are listening to this book, we assume you are someone who is responsible for leading a group of people to achieve something important. This is something that can be achieved only through collaborative effort, requiring a considerable amount of problem solving, ideally by everyone, every day, and about most things. Regardless of how you listen to this book, whether start to finish, theory first, details first, or hearing what the world's best do, our goal remains the same. That after listening to this book, you're equipped with ideas and examples that make you more effective at making your colleagues outstandingly successful. A call to action. The preface began with the observation that everyday people badge in, buzz in, swipe in, scan in, sign in, log in, or otherwise just walk into their places of work. From that common beginning, the differences in their experiences are vast. For some, they can regularly say that they've been able to succeed, that their work was appreciated, and that they added value to their own lives. For too many, they faced regular impediments, felt unrecognized, and had to do work discordantly with what they otherwise value. Either way, those individual experiences are tightly associated with how well the organizations, of which people are a part, perform. Our hope is that we provide enough theory and examples and offer enough detail and clarity to help you reshape the experiences of those for whom you are directly responsible, improve on your own experiences as a leader, and in doing so, change in some positive way the fortunes of the organization of which you are part.